Well, welcome to the week 4 recording for game design, and you can see that week 4 goes from September 3rd to September 6th. So it's a shortened week, which means you're probably going to have to work a little bit harder to get work completed. And I don't put in zeros until Sunday, so that's the 8th, so you actually have extra time each of these weeks, but I just like putting Friday's date to maybe get you moving forward a little bit quicker. So anyway, looking at week 4, now we're going to get into creating content. So if you can remember from last week you created the basics of your story, the ideas behind, or the basics of your game, the story behind it, some ideas on characters, plot, strategies, things like that. This week you're going to do a little bit more about characters, and we're going to learn a little bit more about designing games. So of course the work for this week, the recording you're watching now, the Class Connect write-up you'll do, and then there's a discussion this week. You're going to skip the discussion. We have an assignment called Game Design Document Research. So you do a little bit of research and turn in an assignment. Then you have the story quiz, defining characters quiz, development quiz, virtual reality development quiz, and then finally the character unit project. So you can see you have 4 quizzes this week, a unit project, which is a bigger activity, a design document activity, and the write-up. So let's go ahead and jump into week 4, which is creating content. And before we do, one thing I will remind you of is that I have the big assignments I'm going to create recordings for these. So for the first game design assignment, I created a recording, and I'll probably create a recording for the big assignment we have in the creating content unit. Okay, here we are in game design and creating content unit. And of course, first thing you want to do is look at the Class Connect write-up. So our first question, what is the focus of the creating content unit? Well, that should be pretty easy, right? So the creating content unit, the focus is that you're going to look at the elements that constitute a good game design and the steps involved in designing a game. So that's the focus of this unit. And you can see the different things you'll do in this unit. We're going to look at storytelling for games, understand interactive presentations of game stories, look at game design document, character creation, different attitudes of game characters, the roles of characters in games, knowledge of story development, knowledge of character development, level of progression development, of course going from level 1 to level 2, etc. Analyze the interaction between characters, learn about virtual reality and virtual environment. So we're going to do a lot in this creating content unit. And these are the different assignments. Of course, actually I think we're going to skip, let's see which of these. Actually, we're doing all of these assignments. We're not doing this web quest. We're not doing this web quest, but we are doing these assignments. And the point totals may be slightly different. It's a little warm-up activity. So, you've probably played games before since you're taking this class. Since you're a teenager, you've probably played games before. And what has made characters memorable? What are some of the outstanding traits or attributes? When we talk about traits or attributes, those mean the characteristics. What makes the character what that character is? What defines that character? And that's one of the assignments you're going to have this week. Is Section A. So Section A is all about the story. So let's look at the write-up. What is the main factor that differentiates a game from a movie or a novel? What is the purpose of a cutscene in a game? So let's look at this. It says we've heard of stories once upon a time, and it ends with they lived happy ever after. And of course, all stories have a plot and twists. Plot and twists are how the stories move along. So that's what we're going to look at here, is how stories get transformed into games. So you're going to analyze a story as a game, understand the interactive presentation of a game story, and interpret what's called a game design document. So storytelling for games. So any story is a structured narrative, right, where somebody's telling a story, where it has a starting place and then it has the climax of the story or the ending of the story when something happens, a problem gets solved or something gets discovered or whatever happens to be. But the factor that differentiates a game from a movie or a novel is the involvement factor, in that the player, the viewer of a game, is part of the story, not just watching it. So the thing that differentiates a game from a movie or a novel is that the player actually gets involved in the story. That's what's different between a game and a movie. And when it comes to games, the plot of the story is the central factor which decides how the game progress will go forward. A lot of times the games start with a short clip of the storyline. Usually games, if they're adapted from movies, they're going to actually play the movie and that gets integrated into the game. But there are differences between storytelling and movies and games. So more about the story. So storytelling. So in a movie you can feel a character, but in a game you can be the character, right? So in a game you're actually that person, especially in the first person games. As a movie viewer, when you watch a movie, you're third person. You're watching the action happen. You can't really do anything to affect the way the story goes. But in a game, when you're a character in the game, you can affect the story, right? Games, they rely on your actions before they can progress. I mean, even in a driving game, a car racing game, the actions you take make the story change, don't they? Whether other cars get faster, or they try to crash into you, or whatever it happens to be. So, oftentimes when storytelling is a protagonist is the main character. Then antagonist means anti, or antagonist is against, the person that is an adversary or an opponent. So in a car racing game, you'd be the protagonist, the main driver, and the antagonist would be the person trying to crash you. In a shooting game, you would be the shooter, and then the antagonist would be the person that you're going after, or that's coming after you. And more about the story and interactive presentation of a game story. So, oftentimes you yell at a character in a movie, right? Or if you're watching a football game, throw the ball. So, we can see things happen and we want to be a part of that. And our brains have helped us be a part of that virtual world if it's a game that we're playing in. But sometimes we can get really fired up and really get involved, right? So, of course, in games, we can control the final outcome, where in a movie, we have no purpose in watching a movie. We can't make any changes to it. And most games start with what is a cutscene. In a cutscene, it briefs the players on the mission ahead. So that's what a cutscene in a game is. It tells you what you're supposed to be doing and why you're doing it, what challenges you might have, and things like that. So that's what a cutscene is in a game. And this talks about older games. Some older games had a limited number of outcomes, limited number of paths, like Super Mario Brothers. There were some limitations to that. Of course, these days, some games have unlimited paths that you can try. And you can see that starting with fifth generation, you had 3D environments started coming in. And after fifth generation, games would never be the same, because the 3D environment really made the games much more interactive. And more about interactive presentation in game stories. So some modern games like Half-Life and Kingdom Hearts have rivaled movies in the terms of the graphics and the detail, right? Some of the games my son plays, it's amazing, some of the detail. 7th generation games for Xbox and Nintendo use motion capture technology, right? Most of you have probably seen that, especially if you have a Wii. Obviously, you've used it. So, the primary aim is to minimize the time it takes to learn how to play a game and maximize the enjoyment. And with motion activated, you're right in the game immediately, aren't you? So then the gap between real world and virtual world is bridged, meaning it's coming together. And virtual reality is really getting to be a main part of games. The players feel like they're not just playing it, but players feel like they're actually in the game with virtual reality, don't they? Here's a little multiple choice activity on game categories, so go ahead and do that. This discussion you're not going to worry about, but this discussion talks about what's called game design document. It says do some research on game design document. and define what a game design document is. And you're supposed to write this in a chat, but we're not going to do that. So don't worry about it, but you do need to know what a game design document is. And what a game design document is, it's a document that allows you to structure the game. And there are lots of different game design templates that you can use. And here's what you're going to actually do. So here you're going to analyze the gameplay structure of a game design document called Shop Empire. So the game is Shop Empire. Here's where you go to play it. Your game overview should include these sections. So the point of this is that you are analyzing this game and you're going to create the game overview section of a game design document. So the game overview of a game design document provides this information: the introduction to the game, the concept of the game, the background story, the objective, and the gameplay description. So what you're going to do, you're going to play this Shop Empire game. Then once you've played that game, you're going to act like you are maybe one of the developers of the game, and maybe somebody else has designed it and created it. So now your job is to create the documentation for it. So the documentation you're going to create is you're going to play this game and you're going to write a word processing document answering each of these sections. So when you do this, each section should be written out clearly so I can tell what section is what. So you'd highlight this, paste into a Word document, and then in the introduction section you would type out probably 3 or 4 sentences. Okay, what would be the introduction to this game? And then in the basic concept, what would be the basic concept of this game? You're going to write it out. So you're not evaluating the game, you are creating the document that, this might be the piece of paper that would go in the game when somebody buys the game, buys the game disc. This might be the piece of paper that they would read to learn about the game. Or this could be like the introduction, maybe you're a game reviewer for a magazine, and this might be the information you would send to the magazine when you're reviewing this game. So the background story of the game. So you need to play the game long enough so you know the background story, the objectives of the game, the gameplay description. So how do you play it? What do you have to do? So you're going to create this document. You'll have 5 sections to it in a word processing document. And when you save this, I would call it Creating Content Game Design Document. That way you'll know exactly what the assignment is. So again, you're not evaluating this game, you're not evaluating it, you're creating the documentation for this game that could go along with the disc if somebody buys this game. And I expect probably 2 or 3 sentences for each of these. And the story quiz, so as always, here's your story quiz over here. And for this week, I put all the quiz previews in one document. So they're right here. You just click on that, and you get all the quiz previews. Story quiz, defining characters quiz, etc. That might make it a little bit easier for you. Okay, so that's that section A. So let's go back to our write-up. In gaming, how is a character defined? What is the gaming term for a character you cannot control? What are the 3 parts of a person's attitude? And what does attitude shape? So now going into section B. So in section B, talking about characters. Now this is really important because one of the assignments for this week is working on characters and character development. So a character is the sets of ethics and values which an individual or entity must follow. So that's what a character is. And when you do your work this week, when you create a character, you need to give it values, ethic, characteristics, things like that. So, like in a novel, the first few pages might be setting up what the character is, so you have a sense of what the character is. In movies, character is introduced early in the movie, so you know all about the character as the movie goes along. In gaming, character creation is trickier because the process of a character in gameplay is only half has been defined by the developer. The other half is defined on how you play the game. So these days, as you play games, characters can evolve, can't they? They can get changed, get different. So defining character, the introduction to this. So in the Call of Duty, The character's already been created, right? The soldier with a will to kill. When the gameplay begins, the gamer has the same ideals as the game's central character, means the same ideals, meaning the same thoughts and attitudes and things like that. But then the gamer has your own ideals and personality, and those can reflect what you do in the game. So in a game like that, a first shooter type game, your personality might come out depending on which would then depend on what the character does in the game. So I know if you play a certain type of a game, like Call of Duty, then your friend plays it, you two might play it differently because because your own personality works through the characters. So in this section, we're going to define characters. You're going to have a basic knowledge of character creation, classified attitudes of characters, and understand roles of characters in games. So first, defining characters. So fighting games have many characters to choose from, right? So you could choose whichever one you want to be in fighting games. And each character has different moves associated with him or her. Fighting games have no defined unique levels to travel through. You can just go through different levels, and they'll have different ways to fight. So in some games you might have fighters who are good at kicking, other fighters who are good at hitting, different things like that. Or the same thing with certain games, you might have characters who are good with knives, characters who are good with guns, etc. So those are some of the characteristics. So characteristics and the way the characters act, those are the different abilities and moves that are essential to the game. Now in some games, when you go to different levels, then your character gains different abilities, right? Or different weapons. That's kind of the similar type of a thing. Now player characters, they can be people from real life or non-fiction characters. So sporting games obviously can be real life type characters. Characters from history and national or revolutionary leaders can be some characters in the games. And characters can also be fiction, being fake characters instead of real. So now defining characters. In a game, there's some characters that we cannot control. These characters are non-player characters. So players you cannot control are non-player. Sometimes they can be a villain, they can be a competitor, a bystander, a boss, and they exist to aid you as you go through the game. Or they might even be against you. If they're a villain, they'd be against you, right? But that's a non-player character, are the ones you cannot control. Sometimes you have a secret player, available only after completing a game to a certain level. So those are just some ideas. In some games, they're non-player characters like enemies and bosses that become playable later on when you get a certain level, or if you have some cheat codes, right? So there's lots of different things about characters. And different roles of characters. Each and every character in a game has a given role which, when performed in unison, meaning together, constitutes the game's environment. So the things the character does are part of the game's environment. And characters either help or they can hinder the game's main character. And they can just be bystanders, just standing around and not really affecting gameplay. Now this you can read, and this is going to talk about roles of characters in games, but it'd probably be better if you listened to it as you read it. Like the game Half-Life, the player assumes the role of Dr. Gordon Freeman. There are a number of characters in the gameplay that are part of the environment. There's a female character, an aide, etc. So just listen to this. It talks about how characters are developed. And again, this is important because you're going to create your own character. You're going to expand on the character you started last week, and you're going to create a character for the game, the fictional game that you might create. So listen to this to learn a little bit more about character development. Now, defining roles, attitudes and roles. So attitudes, these are many things: skills, prejudices, and even mannerisms. Those are attitudes. And these different attitudes, they shape a person's outlook on life. So your characters in your games need to be defined properly. I'm going to go back to the write-up to see exactly what our question is. What are the three parts of a person's attitude, and what does attitude shape? So the three parts of a person's attitude are skills, meaning what you can do, prejudices, meaning how you think, and mannerisms, meaning how you act. And these things that relate to attitude, they shape a person's outlook on life. So just like you in person, in your real life, the skills you have, the ideas you have about certain things like prejudices and the way you act, your mannerisms, those shape who you are, don't they? Well, same with characters in games. So a character's attitude can be defined by the developer and then also defined by the way the gamer plays the character. As a character goes through different parts of the game, their character changes, doesn't it? Their skills get better, their prejudices, and even their mannerisms can change. So this talks a little bit about in a game called Painkiller and how a character is changed along the way in the game. And more about defining characters. Now, some games that are real games like soccer and sports, the attitude of the character is prevalent, just like real players are in real life. So, like in FIFA soccer, there's Zidane and Ronaldo, and their characteristics on the field are very similar to their characteristics in the game, right? And of course, gameplay level causes characters to change. So when you create your characters in the assignment this week, you could change your character as it goes from level to level if you want to. Be creative with that. In defining characters, there's a little flashcard activity, so go through that. And then defining characters quiz, right over here on the left. And of course, the quiz previews, all quiz previews right here. Okay, so that was section B, right? So now we're in section C. So now section C, we're looking at concept development. So talking about creating content and the concept development. You want to look at the questions. What purpose does game concept serve? Explain what difficult level strategy in a game is, and what does GURPS stand for? So section C. So here we are in section C. You can see that in section C, when we start looking at games and such, it follows a flow chart, right? So you have the concept for the game, the story, and the different levels. So then as you go up to a different level of the game, there's a new story for the different level. So you have stories for different levels. Then once those levels are created, then you do your character, then you create the interactive part. So before game design progresses, you have to develop the concept for the game. And the concept is the driving force behind the plot, the gameplay, and the goal. So the concept is what determines what you do for the game. It gives the game a feel. So when a game is first conceptualized or first thought about, you think of it differently than when you go in and you start developing the game. The concept summarizes the gameplay experience. It creates the setting, characters, storyline, etc. So that's what the concept does. So the key points to take when you're developing the game concept for a game: who's the audience of the game, which game genre or category do you want it to belong, and for which gaming platforms are you going to be developing it. And jump back to the write-up here quickly. Purpose does game concept serve? Oops. So the purpose that game concept serves is that game concept is the driving force behind the plot, gameplay, goals, and other aspects of a game that give the game the desired feel. So that's the answer to that Class Connect write-up question. So after this section, you're going to know about story development, character development, level progression development, and look at interaction between characters. So story development. Now, one of the things about the stories is that some of you, in the work that you did last week in your basic design, your first game design, you really didn't have much of a story. Well, a story gets the people interested in what the game is going to be about. So your story needs to be a good story, an engaging story, something that has interest. So, if you're telling somebody a story, you don't want it to be a boring story, right? Or they're not going to listen to your story. Same thing with the game. You don't want the story behind the game to be boring, because then people won't buy the game, will they? So in 1983, when Super Mario Brothers came out, it had a brief storyline that was given in the manual, and it talks about the storyline, and then the game is built based on the initial storytelling methods along with a fairy tale structure, right? And then as technology changed, then storylines became quite a bit different. Then we had artificial intelligence and scripted sequences in games. But you know the idea behind the games that you play, there are stories to them. So you need to have a story in mind for your games. So the next development, storytelling, was when sandbox-style games, which allow the player to ignore the game objective and explore other aspects of the game. And this is my son when he plays, I think, Call of Duty and some of those. I say, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm just kind of exploring this neighborhood or this area or whatever. Well, that's really neat because it lets you explore, as this says, other aspects of the game, right? And that's called non-linear, meaning there's not a straight line, there's not a specific thing that a person has to do. They can just go do different things in the game. So your game might be kind of a sandbox type game. And there are many different types of genres of games. We've talked about genres before, haven't we? Action, adventure, construction games, simulations, strategy games, and different role-playing type games. Okay, character development. There's a little presentation about character development. So you can watch this. At the beginning of most games, characters are weak and amateurish, meaning that they're not really high level. They might not have a lot of skills, right? But then as they go along, they get a lot more qualities and power. So for your game, when you create your characters, you can have them be weak. But then as they reach different levels, they might become stronger, get more weapons, gain characteristics, all types of things you can make happen to your characters. So as they gain experience points, then they get to be better shooters, possibly, you know, whatever the type of game happens to be, or better drivers in a car game or something. So in some games, the points increase with each level. In the game where you can spend your time getting additional attributes if you want to build up your character. So you know about games like that, right? But some things about characters, the physical strength, mental ability, leadership qualities, personality, those are some of the attributes that you want to think about to give your character. Then level progression development. I mean, how do people go from level to level? So gaming technique uses difficulty level strategy in order to hold the interest. So difficulty level strategy holds the interest of the gamers. And what this means is that when the difficulty level is high, the rewards are equally high. As a gamer's character develops, his character's experience increases, right? So you want to think about that in games. As players move up levels in games, they become better players. They get better, their characteristics increase, but also as they move up levels, the rewards get greater. So most games follow this same strategy. They use the lower levels to teach the player the game and the different strategies, and you start building your skills so that you can use some of those skills at the higher levels. Then at each level, the experience and the points are maintained, and the gamer gains experience for playing the same game at a higher level. So you as the player gains experience, but also the character's experience increases, right? So that's what level progression is really when the difficulty level is high, the rewards for the character are equally high. That's level progression. More about level progression. So most games follow those methods, moving from level to level. The character will increase their level as they accumulate experience. The character might become stronger or smarter or have more capabilities when they get to different levels. And you know, if it depends on the type of game, they could get spells, they could get combat techniques, those types of things. So the character's level decides the difficulty of the game. Therefore, gaming allows the player to customize the character. So isn't that cool? You could change the player yourself depending on the level you're at. And modern systems, they offer role play called GURPS. And GURPS is a free-form advancement method. And what that means is that the players choose the skill set that they want. So a generic universal role-playing system lets you choose the skill set that you want. That's what GURPS is. Let you choose the skill set that you want. Development of interaction for characters. The interaction between the player and the character is vital in a game, right? So you need to have, so your interaction with the character, the things you make the characters do, is the most important part of a game. And GURPS, what we talked about before, lets you gain skills and attributes and improves the game balance and the flexibility. So you can gain points during the character creation, you can get more intelligence, skills, sets of power, etc., depending on what your character has been doing in the game. So development. Go and do this little practice quiz to see what you know about development. And there's the development quiz right over here on the left. And of course the quiz preview is right there. So that's section C. Make sure we answered all the questions. It said what does GURPS stand for and what it is. We talked about that. And finally section D, were the 3 main ways gamers interact with VR games. So section D, the last section. So once we get into section D, we look at virtual reality games. And they portray another world environment through computer-based simulation. The player is able to interact with the environment for 3D audio, through 3D visual and auditory stimuli. So that's what that question was, wasn't it? It asked, what are the 3 main ways it interacts with VR? That's not quite the answer yet, so don't write that down. Communication between the gamer and the gameplay can be text, visual, or sound. So these are the 3 ways that players interact with games, with VR games: text, visuals, or sound. Now some game designers are adding touch and smell to VR games, and really I think touch is almost there, right? Don't they have some controllers that vibrate when you're doing certain things? But these are the 3 main ways in virtual reality games that you interact with the game. So after this unit, you're going to learn more about virtual reality, understand virtual reality environment. So virtual reality. Well, we really don't see people doing this, do we? But I mean, that's the whole idea behind virtual reality, is that you are placed into a different world. And this actually, I guess that was a certain thing. I wonder how heavy that was. So it's using computer technology to control and discover the computer simulated world. And most virtual reality games, they're first person, but you could have a third person virtual reality game. And in virtual VR world, virtual reality world, you can use the computer devices, keyboard, joystick, mouse, and then there are other ways you can interact with the game. So evolution of virtual games. So here's a little tutorial about the evolution of virtual games. So make sure you play that, or you can just read the script. So this will talk quite a bit about how Amiga came along and they started with the first virtual reality game. And you can read about what these types of things did. And then, of course, Wii came along and has introduced something new to virtual reality type games. Little virtual reality practice activity. So get a shot at that so you know about virtual reality. Virtual reality development quiz right down here. You'll do that. And then finally, creating character. This is the big assignment. So I'm just going to quickly talk about this, but then I'm going to create a separate assignment description for this. But in this one, you're going to build a character from the game that you started to design in week 1. And you're going to make sure that you address all of these things for your character. So you would do this in probably a word processing document, and an essay, and each of these sections would be individualized sessions set off. And as it says, you're going to need to draw to sketch out your character. But I'll talk more about this in another video. Okay, so that's all we have for this week. So I'll go back to the Class Connect write-up. And you can see that we answered all these questions, so you should be good to go on that. So I look forward to all your work coming in. I'm going to go back to the course homepage, look at week 4. This is everything we talked about this week. So you have about 3 or 4 quizzes. You have the write-up to do, game design document, and the character project. So that's all for you. I look forward to your work, and I'll create an assignment directions recording for that character activity for the character unit project.